the business.
When he drinks, he thinks.
That's the nectar of the gods, baby.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the #1 liquid-fueled, liquid-lubricated show on the interwebs. This is the Whiskey Musings broadcast, and I am your host, Rick. Now, last week, unfortunately, I had to drop off unexpectedly, and the reason being is, of course, because of the fact that one of my control boards fell. Hang on. So, for those of you that don't know, I am partnered and the Chief Technology Officer, CTO. Great title. I love it. But anyway, I am in charge of doing the technical resources for the organization called, as soon as I can find it here, the True Grit Roots Network. We are a internet radio station, and what we play is we play rock, we play country, we play blues. Sometimes we meld them together in a version called Fusion, but we have an app out, and we also are a part of the Live 365 grouping. So if you get a chance and you want to listen to, some good American style music, and by American, I mean stuff that was born here, bred here, and we are roots related, which is part of the reason why we're talking about the Roots Network. We're focused mostly on artists and independent artists that may not have signed quite just yet for their large record contracts, etc. So do me a favor, check it out. You can get it on both the App Store as well as the Google Play Store. You can do both. And, again, it's either on our own app, which is the True Grit Roots Network. And it's a 24-hour by 7 operation. I have a program, and unfortunately, I'm not going to be transmitting live tonight, but I do have a program that is on after this show, 10 p.m. Pacific, midnight Central, 1 a.m. on the East Coast, on Saturday, Sunday crossover. And, basically I do a music program there, but here it is nothing but talk. And tonight, unfortunately, I'm not going to be live because in case you haven't noticed, I have a little bit of a a frog in my throat. And, I woke up this morning and I had a little bit of laryngitis. My voice has come back for this. But I don't think that I would be able to actually do both this show and, the music show as well. So I'm going to take a break on the music show. I still program the music and everything, so you'll still be able to listen. But it's not going to be a live show. It'll be whatever automatic recording and that kind of stuff. Now, that being said, let's get on to tonight's show. Tonight, so last week, and for anybody that's watching on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, for anybody there, the last week I ended up having to drop off. The week before that, though, YouTube actually censored and cut out my video. So if you want to see what I talked about in episode 88, in particular, which had a bunch of updates, your best bet is to go to Rumble, the free speech platform alternative to YouTube. And that is a very active community. I see there's some people there watching now, but I also know that there's a bunch of people who have subscribed to my account who are part of the Curator network, the Mark K Show listeners. And I appreciate all of those folks who have joined over there. I think Rumble is actually eventually going to overtake YouTube, especially if YouTube keeps doing what they're doing. And if the YouTubers are watching right now, guess what? Go ahead and do whatever you're going to do. I'll stay there as long as I'm allowed to keep there. But if you can't find me on YouTube all of a sudden, jump on over to Rumble. I will always be on Rumble. And I will try and do the best that I can to stay on Facebook as well as Twitter. But we all know in today's day and age, they want to do censorship, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so, but you will always be able to find me on Rumble, and I am always looking out for new places to stream to. Hopefully I'll be able to stream to like Getter, or potentially, eventually some other locations. But anyway. So moving on. Well, first of all, let me go ahead and haven't done this in a little bit, so I got to remember what's what. So let me go ahead and give a shout out to one of my affiliates. I am an affiliate for them. They are the National Concealed Carry Association. So if you honor and value our God-given right to self-defense by owning a firearm, and would appreciate joining a community of like-minded individuals who welcome firearm owners of all experience levels, then you should consider joining the NCCA. The National Concealed Carry Association, NCCA, exists to serve the Second Amendment community by providing a nationwide network of Second Amendment advocates, offer elite self-defense and concealed carry training from the nation's top instructors, and provide rock-bottom prices on the best selection of gear and accessories. NCCA members enjoy shopping thousands of products with zero dealer markup, unlimited free shipping, and keep more money in their pockets with zero credit card processing fees. The NCCA encourages safe, responsible concealed carry and celebrates those who are brave enough to protect not only themselves, but their families and their communities. If this sounds good to you, visit nationalconcealedcarryassociation.com to join today. As a special bonus, use my affiliate link shown right here. For those of you on the audio side, it is ncca.refr.cc/Rick02 to receive a code for 10% off any purchase at nationalconcealedcarryassociation.com. Once again, use my affiliate link, ncca.refr.cc/Rick02, and receive a code for 10% off your purchase at nationalconcealedcarryassociation.com. Visit nationalconcealedcarryassociation.com. That is all one word, all lowercase, to find out more today. Thank you, NCCA, for allowing me to be a brand ambassador. Now that I've gone and done that. All right. So, tonight I want to talk a little bit about our oil that we've got. You know, we've heard a lot about oil, especially with the dust up over there in Ukraine and with Russia, you know, with America banning Russian oil and things like that. So I thought I'd dig a little bit into what exactly are the strategic petroleum reserves, how much is really there, and then also dealing with some of the things a lot of people have been talking about, drill, baby, drill, right here in our inside of our nation's borders. So I figured I'd jump in and provide a little bit of information about that for tonight's program. But as always, before I get to that, we are going to read from the American Patriots Almanac on this day in American history. Because, of course, I am always I am a freedom-loving American patriot, and I love hearing about American history, so I bring this to you from today's date, March 19th, the book that helped end slavery. Sometimes printed words affect history. One of those times came in March of 1852, with the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin, a novel Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote to call attention to the evils of slavery. The book hit America like an earthquake. Written at a time when the fugitive slave law lacerated consciousness throughout the North, it created unforgivable characters such as poor Eliza, the young slave woman who raced across the frozen Ohio River toward freedom, clutching her infant at her breast. Stowe took care to depict Southern slave owners with charity. She showed them trapped in a system they did not devise. The worst villain of the book was the vicious plantation owner, Simon Legree, a transplanted Yankee. Even so, many Southerners reacted with rage. The book was banned in many Southern communities. In our time, Uncle Tom has become the term of abuse, referring to a black man who is obsequious toward whites. But Stowe's Uncle Tom is a dignified, courageous young man who suffered a beating until he dies rather than give up the whereabouts of 2 runaway slaves. The story moved millions of Americans, especially evangelicals of the North, and helped convince them that slavery in the United States must end. In England, Queen Victoria wept over the book. It is said that when Abraham Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe in 1862 during the Civil War, he said, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." Certainly, Uncle Tom's Cabin did not start the Civil War, but it did much to help end slavery in America. The book has been translated into dozens of languages and has sold millions of copies. Since its publication, it has never been out of print. And that is today in American history from the American Patriots Almanac. This book you can get on Amazon. Check it out. It's got a wealth of information. It's for every single day. It has something for us to take a look at. Now, I'm pretty sure everything is all caught up. Okay, so what is really going on with the whole idea of oil? You know, we make a lot of products out of oil. A lot of people don't understand how much we rely on petroleum products. And it's not just for gas. It's not just for vehicles. It is pretty much everything. I mean, plastics are made out of oil. Some of our electronics boards are made out of oil. You've got oil that goes into a lot of the green energy vehicles. Oil is lubricating things like windmills. It goes into the making of the silicon chips of solar. There is a whole host of things that it's just absolutely incredible how much petroleum products affect our lives and are in our lives. It's even part of clothing as well. I mean, if you have a synthetic fiber in your clothing, chances are there is a portion of that fiber that has come from a petroleum product, especially things like nylon, as a thread, as an example. Okay. So that being said, you know, we obviously, especially here in America, we are very dependent upon petroleum products, along with the rest of the world as well. But we are very dependent on petroleum products, and especially being a first world country like we are, one of our standard operating procedures is to purchase oil from across the globe. One of the places that we purchase from is called OPEC. It is I'm trying to remember the acronym OPEC. It's the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. It used to be called the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, but then other countries joined into OPEC. And one of the things that happened is some people can remember, I can barely remember, mostly just because of the fact that I've been I've been around for a little bit of time here. We'll just say that. But one of the things that I can remember is I can remember the issues that we had in the 70s under Carter when it came to the OPEC oil embargo. And yes, I see in the chat over here on Rumble again, Buddy just kicked out that tires are a big thing. And that is correct. Rubber is made from petroleum products. And again, I mean, that just adds to the list. So, outside of us producing our own oil here in America, and there's plenty of stuff that I could talk about in terms of the ability that we have from making it here, manufacturing it here, refining it here. Some of the things you may have heard and seen in the news is talks about fracking and shale oil and all of that. Tonight, I just want to focus on conventional oil, meaning the oil that's pumped directly out of the ground as crude. And realistically, the question, and you'll always see this whenever we start arguing about oil, you'll see the memes and everything else run around the internet about how America can be completely independent of itself, of any other country. We have so much oil. We have so much oil in the strategic petroleum reserves. And, we've got emergency oil and so on and so forth. And so that kind of fostered me to bring this to the attention and to bring it to you in terms of the research that I have done. So we're going to start off with, we need to understand what the Strategic Petroleum Reserve actually is. And so we're going to start off with that. And we're going to slide over here. And it looks like my head is a little bit in the way, but that's okay. So what is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve? Okay, now it is touted as the world's largest supply of emergency crude oil. Okay. It's administered by the U.S. Department of Energy, and they're federally owned oil stocks. They're used in massive underground salt caverns along the Texas and Louisiana coastlines in the Gulf of Mexico. There's an image on Rumble if you want to take a look to see the 4 locations where the strategic oil reserves are located. Now, first of all, I just want to say, in the interest of security, all of this is available online. I've got the links in the description in Rumble, YouTube, all of those places. I have the links in the description, so you can definitely go and find this on your own. Take a look. But these are essentially salt mines that we have filled with crude oil as a part of the 1973 or in 1973, the OPEC nations imposed an oil embargo against us. And it triggered an energy crisis that sent the U.S. economy into a recession, to be honest with you. It also, ironically, triggered the move away from the large, massive, heavy steel-based cars into more of the foreign models that you see from organizations and companies like Datsun, which turned into Nissan, and some of the other Japanese markets. I don't remember if I think Toyota was around back then. So you had Toyota and Nissan, Honda, a lot of the foreign markets. You'll remember that we switched over to smaller cars, smaller, lighter cars. And it was kind of the end of the big, massive muscle cars that were constantly around in the 60s and 70s, even the 50s with the large, the large Bel Airs and that kind of stuff. So President Gerald Ford signed the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975, which established the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now, the idea here is for us to store oil that we can then grab and bring out in emergency situations. And so one of the benefits that we have, obviously, is that it can also be used to alleviate market impacts. Because if we reach into our strategic reserves and pull oil out, that means that we now no longer have to buy it on the open market, at least not in the massive amounts that we normally would. And so it's been used throughout history to impact when OPEC gets a little full of themselves and pushes the price of a barrel of crude up, because we're able to go, you know what, we're no longer going to buy anymore, and we're going to pull this out of our reserves. We're going to bring it out of our oil reserves. And in fact, just recently, Biden was talking about pulling 30 million barrels out of the oil reserves. And I'll get to that in just a minute. But the idea here is that we are able to grab from essentially a savings bank of oil in order to impact the price that we actually buy. And realistically, it has worked on multiple occasions. Whenever we've dove into it, it obviously brings down the price of the oil barrels, especially if we release a big enough amount to impact those prices. It definitely brings them down. Now, let's see, what else? Okay, so how much is actually in that location? Well, right now, the storage capacity of the caverns, the salt caverns that we actually have used in order to put this oil in, is right around 713.5 million barrels. Okay. Now, do not listen to this. I'll tell you what is currently, don't look at this 622, because this was put together in terms of a specific time frame. It's actually less than that right now, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. But it roughly can max capacity hold about 714 million barrels. Okay. Now this stat shows that it could fill about 1.3 billion large sedans. Okay. Now, honestly, that sounds like a lot of oil. It really, really does. May not be exactly what, it may not be what we really need. And I'll explain that in just a minute. Buddy actually brought up a good point here in the chat on Rumble. He says that it wasn't actually meant as a price control. You are correct, buddy. It was not. The whole purpose of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was not to threaten to go and pump it out every so often. The idea was for us to hold it in case of a situation like war or a very large, natural catastrophe or something like that would cause us to have to, bring those oil reserves out. Now, the interesting thing about the oil reserves is that they can actually pump almost directly to about 50% of our refineries, either through pipelines that have already been established, or they can truck it directly to the refineries that are close. And that makes it to where it is a quick response to when we have challenges when dealing with oil, and dealing with crude oil in particular, and then of course being able to refine it. Now, there's more conversation about what this thing does. I'm not going to show you that, just because if you're interested, I put a link. You can take a look at the whole presentation and you can see where the idea was for that to go. So let me take a second here and find my next graphic. So, so one of the things that we have is the idea that and let's see, where is it? Let's see. There we go. So one of the things is having to deal with the strategic oil reserves. Obviously, we can hold it, and we can hold up to 714 million barrels. What is it at today, though? Now, one of the things that you may remember is that Trump did actually dive into the strategic oil reserves and released a little bit of it, but he also replenished a bunch of it when oil prices were really, really low. In fact, he wanted to go and replenish the entire thing. But I don't think that Congress was going to allow him to do that. And so one of the problems that we have now is that even though our oil reserves can hold up to 714 million barrels, our current amount is, and I know this is, let me try and zoom in just a little bit more here. But one of the things that you can see right up here in the top corner right here is that as of March 11th of this year, they estimate that we have roughly 575 million barrels in that location. So rather than the 700 million that we can hold, we have a couple million short of that. And by a couple million, I'm kind of rounding numbers, of course. So don't hold me to that specific number. But the key here is that we don't have in our strategic reserves everything that we would want. It's not to capacity. We're not even close to capacity. So how is that going to affect us in the long run? And one of the things that you may have seen in the news is the conversation about the fact that, 30 million barrels, how does that really affect us? 30 million sounds like a heck of a lot of oil. And especially when you combine it with 30 million of somebody else's, reserves. So he had mentioned that there was going to be 60 million in total, of which half of that was going to come from the U.S. Well, one of the things that was immediately glommed on by a lot of right-wing media had to deal with the fact that 30 million, while it sounds like a whole crap ton, realistically is not much in the drop of a bucket when it comes to this. And the reason being, and this comes from, so I'm going to tell you about this. There is an organization called CEIC. So let me bring this up real quick. And the CEIC, for over 2 decades, has been a trusted partner to help navigate the world of macroeconomic data. Every day, top companies around the globe trust the CEIC to provide data to be used as the basis for business decisions, economic analyses, long-term plans, etc. So I went out and I basically said, all right, well, realistically, what is our position when it comes to oil consumption? Because, 30 million barrels sounds really, 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 really a lot. I mean, it sounds like a lot to me anyway. But realistically, the CEIC, they track a lot of this because of the fact that a lot of businesses will base their decision making in terms of their financing and what they're going to, stock market prices and what they're going to invest in and that kind of stuff. They're going to go through and they're going to evaluate all of these things that are going on. The United States oil consumption based on the CEIC data is shown right here. And this is, they've been tracking this since 1965 all the way up to 2020. It's done yearly. It's done in barrels per day. And the key information that is here is that in 2020, the United States oil consumption was reported at 177.648 and this is billion barrels per day. Okay. It's decreased, of course, for 2020 decreased from 2019. Gee, I wonder why. Had a lot to do with COVID and a lot less travel and that kind of stuff. But it's also it's updated yearly and it's averaging from 1965 up to 2020. With 56 total observations that we are running right around 17.9 billion barrels per day. So I'm going to show this to you in a graph. So this is the graph format. And as you can see, we've been fairly consistent from about 2009 all the way up into 2020, up until, 2019. And we had the pandemic and we dropped off. But we're running, on average, we're running somewhere between 18 to 19 billion barrels per day. Okay. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means quite a bit because what I'm going to do is as soon as I can find my cursor here, I'm going to bring down this, and let me go ahead and put this away, put that away, put that away. Okay, so I want to show you this, and I'm going to do some calculation here live. So really quickly, we go through 20 roughly. Well, let me back that up. Let me actually say, let's take that back to 18. All right. So we do 18 million barrels a day. So that's 6 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So we have 18 million barrels per day. Now we multiply that times, oops, sorry, that's a, it's a sound effect for something that I do Anyway, okay, so we have 18, and we're multiplying that times 365 days in a year. So what does that give us? Well, that gives us, and let me count this so make sure that I'm doing this right. We got 1, 2, 3, so that's 1,000. 1, 2, 3, so that's another 1,000. So we're looking at roughly 6.5 billion, that's with a B, billion barrels per year that we are going through. Okay. So what does that 30 million get us? Well, it doesn't get us a whole heck of a lot, because if we do our 30 million, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we divide that by the 365 days in the year, we get roughly, it's going to be roughly around 82,000 barrels per day. Well, that doesn't even come close to the amount of barrels per day that we use. So we're talking just a couple of days worth bringing out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. If we pull 30 million barrels out of that, then we have a bit of a problem, because that's not going to take care of our resources. That's not going to take care of everything that we have in terms of our needs. So, what in the heck? Why are we having to? Why do we even consider that as a great number? It really isn't. It really is not a very big number, and it's only going to survive. Only going to have us survive for 2 to 3 days worth of oil. Now, here's the other problem that we have, is that even though we pull that out, so first of all, the Strategic Oil Reserve has a limit on how much we can actually pull per day. And I was reading about it from the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, and they essentially said that we can only pull about 1 million barrels per day out of the Strategic Oil Reserve. Okay, well, that number doesn't add up very much either, because 1 million barrels per day, and we use roughly 18 million per day, that only gives us 1/18 of our daily consumption. So this is a bit of a problem to utilize the Strategic Oil Reserves. Not to mention the fact that we also have to pull it out, we have to refine it, and that takes time. There's an article that came out today. Actually, I think it came out either today or I was talking about something that happened in the government yesterday, and I'll bring that up here in just a minute. That brings up this point, that basically, even though we have, 1,575,000,000 barrels in our Strategic Oil Reserves, we still are not going to be able to, even if we could pull all of it out at once, we're still not going to have enough to cover what we've got going on. Now, Russia's imports, in terms of our imports, are realistically only about 8% of what we import. Okay. So that being said, it's not that much. So we technically could replace at least that small percentage that we import from Russia from our Strategic Oil Reserves. Unfortunately, again, we're going to be hampered by how much oil we can actually take out at any one given time. We also have to think about replacing it after we've done it. So what about conversations that we've had with regards to places like Anwar or the most recent oil field? I can't think of the name right off the top of my head, but Bakken, I think, Bakken, I think it's how it's pronounced. So what about those? What about those places? I mean, realistically, if we can't pull it out of our Strategic Petroleum Reserves, if we don't have that much there, what about some of these other locations? Well, the USGS, which goes through and does these estimates, they went through and they printed out, or they published, I should say. And again, as soon as I can find my cursor, there it is. So they published a a press release and some information back in 2012 with regards to what they estimate that we actually have in potential conventional oil reserves, places that we can pump crude oil directly, that we don't have to modify from like shale or do any kind of fracking or any of that, that we can just pump conventional crude oil out of the ground. Now, keep in mind, their evaluation was only within the actual U.S. borders themselves on land. Does not, this particular number does not cover anything that would have been offshore drilling. They're very particular in saying this. So let me go ahead and bring this up. So this was an assessment that was done back in 2012 with regards to our potential conventional oil and gas resources. And I've highlighted something specific here. So the mean estimated volumes of crude oil are 32 billion barrels. Now that, again, keep in mind, is within the United States itself and what we can pull from on land. All right. Now, I don't want to go into the natural gas or any of that kind of stuff, although I've got it highlighted here. You know, we do have natural gas and then natural gas liquids, NGLs. So there's a lot there when it comes to it, but 32 billion barrels is not really going to supply us with very much. I mean, I just went through the calculation. It's not going to necessarily cover everything. I'm not going to take you through that whole calculation again, but I did a quick calculation on 32 billion, and it's roughly 5 years at a consumption rate of around 20 million barrels a day. So we could possibly go a little bit longer than those 5 years if we were to cut back our oil consumption. And if I were to do it actually at 18 instead of at 20, we might be able to push it a little longer. But you're looking at roughly 5 years for us to go ahead and get involved or to be able to replace anything that we might be buying on the open market. So let me see. Yep. All right. So this is the assessment results, and this kind of says the same thing up again, but or up at the top. It just says that the estimates are roughly around 32 billion barrels of crude oil for all of these locations that they're talking about. Now, you've been, again, in the news, you might have heard about this Bakken reservoir that has, quote unquote, just been discovered. And also, a lot of people talk about drilling in Anwar. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that, and Buddy brought it up on the Rumble chat, has to deal with, these are 2012 numbers as well. However, they did release, and let's see if I can bring that up, because they did release a press statement. This was edited on 9/5, and I'll go ahead and bring this up. And they updated this. So as you can see, it came out in August 14th, 2012, and it was updated in September 5th of 2019. And I've highlighted the crucial point here. They're still estimating around 32 billion barrels of oil. They're still guessing that that's about what we have in terms of our crude. Now, keep in mind, this is a guesstimate. I mean, these are probing studies. These are studies of people that, these scientists that go out and they do an estimate based off of, however they collect the data, and they try to figure it out. Now, we've actually seen in the USGS site, if you go there, you can actually find, charts and graphs that show that the estimate has dropped in the last several, especially from 2012 backwards. The estimate has dropped quite significantly, I would say. But if we just roughly look at about 32 billion barrels and we carry that number forward, I think we can safely say that we're looking at about 5 years of potential oil that we can pull just off of the land itself. Now let me. Okay. So in this particular press release, they also brought up the current USGS estimates for places that are undiscovered, but technically recoverable conventional oil from both onshore and outside in the state waters. And they are essentially estimating that as far as the other places that they don't have discovered, they're estimating 27 billion barrels. So 27 billion and 32, just to go real quick, that's roughly 59 billion barrels. Okay. So they're guessing right around 59. We'll just round it up a little bit. We'll go to 60 to make the math easier. So they're guessing that we have roughly 60 billion barrels in both what we know and what we don't know. But one of the things that you're going to see, or you may have heard already in the news, is talking about this Bakken reserve and how much is actually in the Bakken. And there's been several, okay, why would you want to do that? But okay. So there have been several key factors. They've been talking about the Bakken and how big this Bakken is, and that we have so much stuff there that we can fund ourselves for years and years and years. They just released a petroleum assessment for the Bakken and the Three Forks formations. Now, for those of you that don't know where those are, I'll bring those up. And it's basically in kind of the North Dakota, Montana type area, mostly in Dakotas. It's got a little bit of Montana over here on the left, but nothing really big. And it's mainly a lot of this area that you see with the colored highlights in the different spaces. Now, one of the things that they talk about in terms of the Bakken is they estimate, right here I highlighted, they estimate 4.3 billion barrels of oil. Now, 4.3 billion, that's only going to cover us for 2 days. That's if we can pump it all out fast enough to be able to keep up with things. So realistically, I mean, we have a potential to potentially drill and at least, let's just say, level set a little bit with regards to oil and the price of crude oil. But it takes a while for this to happen. It takes a little bit for this stuff to get out of the ground. It takes a little bit for it to travel and for it to go to the refineries. And speaking of refineries, we've only had a couple of refineries, and by a couple, I mean maybe less than 5, that have been updated or built since 1975. So realistically, we're kind of in a bit of a conundrum and a crunch placement when it comes to our oil. So even though I would love to say that, hey, we are able to be completely self-sufficient, the reality of it is that we may not be as self-sufficient as what we would like to believe that we are. And one of the things that you have heard about or have probably seen on the news has to deal with the oil and gas leases. And especially Jen Psaki has talked about how they have the oil industry has, roughly 8,999 leases to be able to, drill already, that they already have, that they don't need anymore. And what a lot of people don't understand is that a lot of this stuff is just guesswork. We don't know until we start pumping and until we get to the bottom of whatever that space cavern, wherever that oil field has. We really don't know. We're making educated guesses. We're basing this off of scientific experiments and, things that we've seen in the past in order to understand where we might be at. So the reality of it is that we may have 60 billion barrels of oil here. We may not. We may only have 45 billion. We may have 100 billion. We honestly cannot make a complete assessment until we actually get into starting to pull that oil from the ground. We also have newer technologies nowadays like oil shale and the fracking, in which we are able to extract crude from those drills and drilling. And technology has come a long way in terms of petroleum. Now, I can remember back in the 1970s how everybody would, when 80s, actually, let me rephrase that, back in the 80s, where everybody was talking about how, oh my gosh, our oil resources are limited. It's millions. Sorry, buddy. It's millions. It was roughly 17 million per day, 17 to 18 million per day. So as far as, and that's our consumption, by the way, that's our consumption. So back in the 80s, they were talking about how, oil was, petroleum was going to eventually going to go away. It was going to have, it was a limited resource, et cetera, et cetera. And the funny thing about it is that kind of started the whole Green New Deal, green ideas, going to wind and solar and hydroelectric, nuclear in particular. And as far as pound for pound, when you're talking about the amount of energy that you can get out of, as far as the amount of energy that you can get out of a gallon of oil or a gallon of modified oil versus something like a solar panel, or potentially wind energy or even hydroelectric, they honestly can't compete. I mean, if you really have a question, just take a look at two places. You can look at California every single year. And California has challenges in trying to get the amount of electricity that their populace needs. In fact, they buy electricity from neighboring states, including places like Oregon and Washington and Nevada. They purchase it and they have it shipped down into California because California has decided to go with a renewable energy policies and Green New Deals. And they don't have enough anymore. They don't have enough coal and petroleum and that kind of stuff fossil fuels in order to fire up their plants and provide the electricity that is needed. Now we start talking about things like cars, and cars themselves, like electric cars, they need a lot of electricity. They need a lot of wattage in order to go through and charge. And a lot of people don't understand that a lot of our infrastructure is aging. It hasn't been updated. And so therefore, it may not even be able to handle the amount that we're dealing with. You see news articles coming out almost all the time about this, about challenges with our electrical grid and electric cars and charging them and things like that. So we are in a bit of an energy crisis, but I personally, and this is my opinion, but I personally don't believe that renewable energy is going to be available enough to be able to take us completely off of fossil fuels, like all of these people are trying. Plus, we have challenges with batteries. The batteries are built out of heavy metals, precious heavy metals that cannot be renewed. Once they're gone completely. And so, those heavy metals are also mined by, believe it or not, vehicles that are using petroleum for their fuel source. And the batteries themselves, they aren't recyclable at this point. There has not been an effective way to recycle those car batteries appropriately in order to be able to keep using them over and over and over and over and over again. When you deal with wind energy, those wind turbines, and I think I did this on one of my other episodes, you can go back and take a look. It was on green energy, but they take up to 80,000 gallons of oil to one singular turbine for the wind in order to lubricate the thing on a yearly basis. These things are not 100% And I always believe, and I've always said this, but I always believe there's positives and negatives to anything. In fact, if scientists have really believed that the only true renewable energy, or the only true energy that we could use in order to get rid of fossil fuels, happens to be nuclear. And nuclear energy is not something that everybody wants, because of course we hear about the 3 Mile Island incident. We hear about things like Chernobyl. It's a very, very volatile, and plus the byproducts, are used in things like nuclear bombs and so on and so forth. So there's real, or you go, especially in Washington, you go and talk about the Hanford nuclear reservation and the cleanup that happens there, the leaking drums, there really isn't a way for us to deal with a full amount of energy in the format that we need. And I'm not necessarily advocating that fossil fuels are the only way to go. They're not. I do believe that we need to bring on those other green energies, but they're not 100% ready. Unlike what the Biden administration is trying to push, they're not 100% ready for prime time. I mean, if you think about it, you can only charge those batteries off of solar when the sun's up. If you live in the northern hemisphere, by northern hemisphere, I mean north of, let's say California, and you live up in, say, Oregon and Washington, where it rains quite a bit, and we have, cloud cover, probably 60%, if that, or if not more, of our time, we can't use solar on a regular basis. In fact, our hydroelectric dams are backup systems for overflow from the other electrical plants that we have that are coal-fired. And the reason for that is because, again, pound for pound, we cannot replicate what can be pulled out of fossil fuels. We have been unable to consistently replicate this. So why are we continuing down the path of let's make green energy the only way to go? Because they are pushing the whole climate change, and I won't even get into that, but they want to get us off of those fossil fuels. Makes sense, but if we can do it in such a way that it makes sense for us to do so, if we can come down to the point where we maybe don't pull as much electricity as what we need, we just cannot do pound for pound. We cannot do it all on green energy. It's just not possible. And why anybody would even sit there and have the fallacy idea that that's even a potential issue is they're lying to you. They're completely lying to you. Now, this last article that I have here, it just popped up. Ironically, as I was preparing for the show tonight, this article just popped up out of the Epoch Times. And this is where the Biden administration is actually going to resume oil and gas leasing on federal land. Now, oil and gas leasing and resuming this, you think, hey, this is cool. This is really good. This is going to help us. This is going to make us. No, it's not. And realistically, the reason why I say that is because of the fact that it takes a long time for things to actually filter through the system. So it takes a while. So this is more of a long-term thing. But here's where the article brings in an interesting point. And I just want to pop this up right here in front of you. Take a look at this. The Biden administration said Friday that it would resume plans for oil and gas drilling on federal lands and waters after an appeals court ruled to allow the use of an approximately 5-fold higher social cost of carbon value in evaluating permits. Wait a minute. So you think, oh, the Biden administration is backtracking. No, they're not backtracking. They're actually making it. They want to make more money. That's what this means. Okay. So what the federal court appeals has to deal with, and let me bring it down here. So shortly after President Joe Biden came into office, and I'm reading right here. Shortly after President Joe Biden took office, the White House raised the, quote, social cost of carbon, or the SCC, value from around $10 per ton, which was what Trump lowered it to an Obama-era value of around $50 per ton. So wait a minute. So they basically raised what they call the social cost of carbon. And again, this is part of the climate change initiatives. And what happened was they raised it after Trump had it down around $10 per ton to $50 per ton. Well, a number of Republican-led states sued the Biden administration over the raising of that value from 10 to 50. And a U.S. district court in Louisiana granted a preliminary injunction that blocked the use of the 50. Now, obviously, the Biden administration went and appealed that ruling, and several days ago, in the the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, granted a stay of the previous judges, the district court judges, preliminary injunction, so that now they are allowed to use that $50 per ton value over the $10 per ton value that was that the states were seeking. So now the thing about this is that even if lease sales resume, it will do little to boost oil production in the near term, because like I told you, you have to pull the crude out of the ground. You have to take it to a refinery. You have to refine it. You have to do all of these things with it. And so, yes, it's going to take time for this to work out. All right. Now, this person, Jesse Prentice Dunn, who's the policy director at the Center for Western Priorities, a conservation and advocacy group, said in a statement, quote, "Make no mistake, resuming lease sales today will do nothing to increase oil production tomorrow. As Americans feel pain at the pump, oil companies are sitting on more than 9,000 approved but unused drilling permits that they can use now, but are choosing not to." Okay. Now, that statement is basically echoed and has been echoed by Biden as well as Jen Psaki. But here's the thing. Are we playing the short game or are we playing the long game? If we're playing the short game, then yeah, absolutely. It's not going to make that big of a difference. But realistically, under Trump, we were energy independent for the first time in decades. We were energy independent from OPEC and Russia and any other nations that were not part of OPEC. And we were set, honestly, if Biden had not done what he did on his first day and rescinded the executive order on Keystone XL pipeline, we were set to make sure that we had enough oil that we wouldn't have to be going through these processes and these issues with our oil prices. Now, interestingly enough, let me back out of this. So a little bit farther down, they keep talking about there's a backlog of leased land and again, the 9,000. Those are just leases. You think of those as realistically as bets. They are bets on the fact that there's oil there and that it can be productive to pull that oil out of the ground. This is essentially, it's an estimate to figure this stuff out. And it's going to take a little bit of time for the amount of oil that they pull out in order for any particular drilling site to actually become a better return on investment. And this is where we have a bit of a problem because, the government seems to think that just because they have 9,000 leases, that this is going to be a huge boon for the oil industry. And that the oil industry people they're the ones that are causing all of this problem. And they're the ones that are, raising the gas prices at the pump, and they're basically price gouging and so on and so forth. But the reality is that it takes time. It takes a lot of time, and it is a bet. It's a bet on whether or not they're going to be able to pull up the oil out of the ground. It's a bet. It really is. But let's take a look for just a second, because, the conversation is that they talk about how, gas prices are not tied to crude oil prices. Well, that's not true. And let me explain to you why. Here is an image that I pulled from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Okay. And this is basically, again, the link is in the description of the video, but this is basically they kind of track some of this stuff. But in this particular case, I was looking at our short-term energy outlook. Like short-term, what are we going to be looking for? And they do a forecast. They put a forecast out about things like gas prices and stuff. And this graphic, you can see down in the bottom corner. I'll blow it up just a little bit more so you can see it. This is comparing the price of crude oil to the price of gas, of regular gasoline. Now, something you need to understand is that crude oil has to be refined quite a bit in order for it to make gasoline, what we consider our 89 octane and all of that stuff. But if you look at this graph, and the blue line is the regular retail sale price of gasoline. The kind of brownish line is the monthly cost of crude oil. And per gallon, the graph is showing this in a per gallon scenario. Now, if you look at the two graphs, you look at the two of them together, you can see there is a difference between the blue line and the brown line, and that obviously has to deal with the production of the gas in relation to the crude oil prices. But if you look at the general path that is taken by both of those lines, they're almost exactly the same in terms of the pattern, the path, the tracing that you see up there. Now, if this was really price gouging, don't you think that there would be a large differential between the crude oil prices and the blue line of the monthly regular gasoline prices? You would actually see the gap in between those two lines be a little bit bigger. But it seems to stay fairly consistent from 2019 to 2020 to 2021 to 2022. And it's even more consistent, or sorry, it's not more consistent, but it's even more relevant in the fact that the forecast looks relatively the same. They're carrying it across. It's the two lines are relatively equidistant from each other throughout the past, from 2019 all the way up to 2021 and even into 2022 right now, which they're still kind of forecasting that the price of oil is going to go up. That's the dashed lines in both of these things, that the gas prices are going to go up, the crude oil prices are going to go up, but they're relatively about the same distance. They're almost equidistant from each other. So if this was really price gouging, you would see a difference in this. And this, again, is coming from the Energy Information Administration, the U.S. Energy Information Administration. And it makes you wonder, how is it that the Biden administration can talk about how, and especially senators like Senator Warren, who is talking about, the price of gas being a price gouging scenario, then, why is it that they keep talking about that when I can just go and do a search on the internet and find something like this in a graphic, and you can see, generally speaking, that they're pretty close to one another. Now, the other one is not just gas, but we also run off of diesel, and diesel goes into our trucks, big semis, in order to travel goods all around. So when diesel prices go up, the cost of transportation goes up, which of course means that the cost of goods go up. So let me show you what the diesel prices are doing. And they're relatively in the same general boat. I mean, when you look at the differential between the two lines, in this case, it's a green line for the diesel and a brown line once again for the price of crude oil. Now, diesel is generally not refined as much as gasoline is. But if you look at the graph itself, and you see the distance again between the two lines is not that much. I mean, it doesn't vary that much. There is a little bit of variance here and there, but generally speaking, the average or the typical is the variance is not that big of a difference in the two lines, and especially, again, not dealing with price gouging. This looks like this is a steady flow or a steady pace of cost and price back to the consumer between the cost of the crude oil plus all of the costs that you have with processing and back out from 2019, 2020, and 2021 into 2022, and expected to be relatively the same into the beyond. So where are they getting this idea? I mean, honestly, I have a feeling that these people are not looking at their own energy information. They're not looking at their own sources of information to try and figure out, and they're trying to pull the wool all over our eyes. But it's stuff like this that somebody can go and find out just on their own on the web. They can take a look, they can see that we do have an issue. I'm not going to deny that we do have an issue. But first of all, it's not quite as bad of an issue. And our dependence on fossil fuels, honestly, is going to continue regardless of what anybody thinks. We are not going to be able to make the quick switch over to green energy right away. We are not going to be able to wean ourselves off of petroleum products because it's more than just gas and oil and diesel fuels. It's a lot more than that. And it's not necessarily the oil companies that are completely gouging the American people, at least not now. So one last thing that I do want to play for you. Joe Biden mentioned in a press conference, and this soundbite is actually split. The first part is a recent press conference that he had where he was asked a question about gas prices and so on and so forth. The second part, in it's probably more of like a 1/3, 2/3 kind of scenario, but the second part of the clip is him at the the Democrat National Convention and the Democrat debates. So let's take a listen to Joe Biden and his oil policy really quick.
It's simply not true that my administration or policies are holding back domestic energy production.
Number one, no more subsidies for fossil fuel industry, no more drilling on federal lands, no more drilling, including offshore, no ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period. And
so I'm sorry, Joe. Once again, I can't believe you. I definitely cannot believe you. I do not believe that, first of all, that your administration is not affecting prices or trying to affect prices. I mean, take a look at what they did. They held on to the lease agreements. They held on to them until things went favorably in their court to allow them to start making money. Make higher money on a ton basis. And once again, Trump has shown that he is an America First candidate, that Trump has shown that he is right and he understands business. And we have people in office right now who don't. There's a lot more that's going on. I don't know if you've seen here recently, just as a final thought, this is sort of off topic, but a final thought about the Hunter Biden laptop. The New York Times came out this week saying that, yep, it was real. 2 years after it was brought up, 2 years and an election in between. And what's funny about that, and this is my final Whiskey Musings thought, but what's funny about this is the fact that the mainstream media and the social networks held back on that and stifled it for the plain and simple reason that would have potentially changed the outcome of the election. And there's enough people who have stated in polls since then that had they learned about Hunter Biden and the laptop, had they heard about it, they wouldn't have voted for Joe. And once again, Trump was proven right. And that's my final Whiskey Musings thought of the evening. Do me a favor, if you like the content that I provide for you, go over to Rumble, subscribe. It's free. And I mean, if you can't get on Rumble, then definitely, I mean, YouTube, sure. Some of the other places. Also, follow me on my social media accounts. You can follow me on Twitter. I do have a Facebook page. I have Locals, Getter, Parler, and I think I mentioned Twitter already. Twitter, Facebook, Locals, Parler, Gab as well. And that's my final Whiskey Musings of the Thought tonight. You guys have a great evening, and we'll see you all next time on the Whiskey Musings broadcast. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Good night, everybody.